Hello, bros. We're back with the 17-Mile Horror by Dick Gessler, 1981 novel by a Metro Detroit author who was not an author. He was a lineman for Michigan Consolidated Gas and also what was he at Ford? Not sure what he did at Ford, but did something. Chapter 1, and this book is falling apart, but it's the only copy I've seen of this book. Chapters, 6 pages? Might be able to get a couple in there. July. The full moon was playing hide and seek with the clouds. As it passed behind a cloud, the recreational areas in the park far below were engulfed in total darkness. When this occurred, the people enjoyed a warm summer evening in the play area and picnic groves, would look up at the darkened sky, an ominous feeling coming over them. They looked at the dark, shadowy areas that surrounded the playing fields and backed away, as if instinctively sensing danger. There had been 3 mysterious disappearances in this park area in the past 3 months. Police and the sheriff's department had warned people who used the park facilities to stay in groups. They were asked not to walk in the area of the Rouge River, which ran the entire length of the park. This part of the park had a dense growth of underbrush and thick hedges that separated it from the rest of the picnic and play areas. Anyone concealing himself along the riverbank would be almost invisible to a person looking in that direction from the park proper. The moon, still playing its games with the clouds, suddenly reappeared, turning the darkened scene below into a brightly illuminated stage. The people in the park were like actors who continued their performance when the spotlight was again upon them. A black Ford LTD with a young man driving was following a car ahead of him. The car was driven by a blonde teenage girl. 3 other young girls were in the car with her. They were cruising the park, a popular pastime with the teens of both sexes. A car full of either boys or girls would slowly drive around the park looking for an equal group of the opposite sex. The car full of girls spotted 4 boys sitting on a picnic table drinking beer from cans. They were dressed only in brief cut-off Levi's. The driver of the car slowed down her vehicle. The girl next to her leaned out the window and shouted at the group of guys sitting on the picnic table. "Hey, you foxes! Want a party?" A black curly-haired boy, beer still in hand, jumped off the table and started running along the slowly moving car. The others on the picnic table quickly followed suit. "What do you chicks have in mind?" the black-haired boy asked the girl in the front seat. The girl's eyes traveled over the boy's well-proportioned body, and her gaze came to rest on his crotch. "Want a ball?" she asked. "I dig your body." "Your place or mine," he joked as he looked closely at the girl. The girl was dressed in a very brief bikini. A very brief? I didn't know there was a differentiation between brief and very brief. The other girls in the car were dressed in bikinis also. The fabric of the bikini top had slipped down, exposing the nipples on her large breasts. Oh no. "Hey, baby, I dig your body too," he said as he looked at the exposed nipples. "What's happening?" one of the boys that had been on the picnic table asked, as the rest of the group caught up with the slow-moving car. "Hey, Larry," the black-haired boy said, "these chicks want to get it on. What do you think? Can we help them out?" "Can we help them out?" Larry mocked. "What do you say, guys? Should we help them out?" The other boys started whooping and hollering. They jogged along both sides of the slow-moving vehicle. One of the young boys looked in the back seat on his side of the car and saw a black-haired girl slouched against the rear seat, a can of Pabst in her hand. She had on a yellow bikini bottom and no top. Whoa, Jesus, what is this book going to be? Her breasts were larger than the girls in the front seat with protruding nipples. When she... Oh man, what have I got myself into? When she saw the boy looking in at her, she started swinging her breasts from side to side. "Do you like these, baby?" she said drunkenly. Yeah, man, I dig big boobs, he said as he reached through the open window and started massaging her large mammaries. Maybe this is why this book disappeared, because there's literally nothing to it. The blonde girl who was driving the car pulled off into a picnic area. Before the car had come to a complete stop, the girls jumped out and paired off with the guys. The young man in the black Ford who had been following the car full of girls had taken in all of these events. When he saw the driver of the car pull off into a picnic area, he continued on until he reached another cutoff that led to a playing field. He made a U turn and drove to a dirt road adjacent to the picnic site, where the girls had pulled off the main road. As he drove slowly down the dirt road, he noticed that a girl dressed in a blue bikini and a boy were carrying a case of beer toward the picnic table. He drove another 200 feet until he came to a dirt road that ran parallel with the river. He made a left turn onto the river road and pulled to a stop behind a clump of trees. He got out of his car, eased the door shut, and started walking to a row of thick hedges. The hedges and thick underbrush shielded him from the four couples that were having a party on the picnic table, which was no further than 100 feet from where he was standing. Hey, how are we doing today, my friend? What is this book? Well, you're gone already, but it's this book. I think you're gone anyway. If you're not, it's The 17-Mile Horror by Dick Gessler, a 1981 novel by a local Metro Detroit author. He was a tall young man. Oh, you are here. Ah, it showed nobody was here. So far, it's supposed to be a horror movie or a movie. He projected this to become a film, even though he'd never been published before. But so far, it's just turning out to be Playboy or Penthouse Forum. I mean, I don't know about strange. It's more tawdry than strange. Well, it is kind of strange because you're going to see what happens here. I kind of know the synopsis. He was a tall young man, about 6 feet. He had the body of an athlete. His brown hair complemented his handsome face. He was dressed in a white t shirt, cut off shorts, and a pair of blue and white sneakers, the usual park attire. He reached in his right pocket and pulled out a plastic bag. Inside the bag was a cotton pad. He replaced the plastic bag. From his left pocket, he pulled out a bottle. He held the bottle up, noted that it was full of a yellow liquid, then replaced it in his pants pocket. He walked a few feet to the thick row of hedges and laid down on the ground. Through an opening in the hedges, he could clearly see the four couples. The picnic table he had seen was only a short distance from where he lay. As he looked through the opening in the hedge at the scene in front of him, he suddenly gasped for breath, shocked by what he was seeing. The girls had taken off their bikinis and were completely nude. Two of the couples had gotten blankets and were laying down on the grass on each side of the picnic table. The other two couples were sitting on top of the table facing him. The moonlight that cascaded down on the nude bodies below transformed the flesh tones of their bodies to an alabaster white. It was as if he were watching living, moving statues perform in front of him. As he watched the spectacle, he could just make out what they were saying. All right, Fox. And mind you, this is 1981. The black haired girl that was in the rear seat of the car was saying, "Let's see what you have to offer." Also, I subbed. It's nice to see people still doing this from my time. I would be in the park and taking turns reading things like this when we were young teenagers. She put down her half empty can of beer and reached over to unzip the fly in his cutoffs. With hands that were not unfamiliar to what they were doing, she removed his large penis. Oh no. I hope this whole book ain't like this because I'm not going to read this whole thing. I don't think this is appropriate for YouTube. Son of a bitch, Betty, she gasped as she turned to the blonde girl on top of the table. Look at the size of that tool. Betty jumped off the table, breast bouncing in their unencumbered state, and walked over to the boy, who by now had dropped his shorts and was standing nude in front of them. She reached down and grasped his organ, watching it grow in her small hand. Hey, babe, she breathed heavily as she spoke. I'd like to give you some head. Oh, my God. Read it. Get your fucking hands off him, you bitch. He's mine, the black haired girl snarled as she removed Betty's hand and pushed the girl away. The black haired girl took the boy by the hand and walked away from the table. It's going to be a cat fight. I can get better head than she can, Fox, she said as she led him to the clump of hedges where the young man was hiding. When they were only a few feet in front of the hedge, she knelt down on the damp grass and took all of him in her mouth. She was so expert in what she was doing that it was all over in a few minutes. She fell back on that damp grass and opened herself up. Jesus Christ. He buried his face between her legs and soon had her moaning in ecstasy. When they were finished, he reached down and brushed the perspiration from her face. I'm sure he did. Baby, you're good, he said between gasps of breath. You're pretty terrific yourself, she whispered as she brushed his face with her hands. Babe, I'm going for a beer. Can I get you one? No, no, just let me lay here for a while till I can catch my breath. Then I'll give you a repeat job. He turned and walked back to the table, his sweating body glistening in the moonlight. In the bushes, a few feet from where the girl was lying, the young man was breathing heavily. He was kneeling now. His cutoffs were down around his ankles, his erect tool in his hand. Oh no. From his vantage point behind the hedges, he had watched the scene at the picnic table. When he saw the nude couple walk toward him, he was beside himself with frustration. With his hand on his penis, he matched the couple stroke for stroke. Finally, the river of passion inside him flowed through his blood-engorged penis and shot into the leaves of the hedge in front of him, dripping from leaf to leaf like a waterfall. This is a very disappointing book. Until the thick white sperm mingled with the damp grass, forming a milky white pool at his feet. Exhausted, he fell to the ground. Through the opening in the hedge, he saw the naked boy get up from the girl and return to the picnic table. He watched as the boy joined the others. The couple that he had left at the table were now sprawled on the ground. The boy on top of the blonde girl, the other two couples on the blankets, were also engaged in various sex, huh? The boy took a beer from the cooler, opened it, and walked over to where the blonde girl and one of his friends were engaged in a game of oral sex. First, he thought that he might join the sweating couple. Then he thought better of it and walked back to the girl that he had left, laying on the ground by the row of hedges. He stood over her, his long, limp penis hanging from his groin. Hey, baby, he said as he knelt down and stroked her hair. I'm ready for that repeat job. The girl did not move. He massaged her large breast, then moved his hand between her legs. She remained silent. Her body did not respond to his advances. When he moved his head closer to hers, he could hear the even breathing. The beer, the pot, the sexual encounter had taken their toll. She had passed out. He stood up and looked at the body of the girl lying at his feet. Her breast and belly and legs were covered with beads of perspiration that glistened in the bright moonlight. "Oh, shit," he said, as he turned and walked back to the others. When the young man hiding in the bushes saw the boy walk away from the girl, he knew that he must act now. He got to his feet. He moved the bottle and the plastic bag containing the cotton pad from his pants pocket. He opened the bottle and poured some of the contents on the pad. He held the pad away from his face. Placing the bottle and the empty bag in his pockets, he crawled through the small opening in the hedge. In a moment, he was at the girl's side. He started breathing heavily again as he looked down at her nude body. He quickly placed the pad over the girl's nose and mouth. She reacted to the sickening smell of the chloroform that she was breathing. She tried to raise her body, but the man held her down with one hand, all the while pressing the pad tightly against her nose and mouth. He could feel her struggle, but continued to keep pressure on the pad and her shoulders until, in only a matter of half a minute, he could feel the body of the girl relax and grow limp under his touch. He replaced the pad in its plastic pouch and returned it to his pocket. He grabbed the girl by her arms and dragged her through the small opening in the hedge. The entire operation had only taken him 2 minutes. He picked the new body up in his arms and walked to his car. After placing the unconscious girl in the back seat, he slowly drove down the dirt road. The road followed the river, then branched off to the left, joining the main street that ran the entire length of the park. He made a right turn and followed the paved road until he came to a large 2.5-story building called Nankin Mills Nature building was over 100 years to make parts for his first cars. The building had since been turned into a museum and was also used by the teenagers as a meeting place in the park. He drove past the old building until he came to a large baseball field. Just beyond the field, a dirt road wound its way through a heavily wooded area and finally ended on Plymouth Road, a main intersection that led to Detroit in one direction and Plymouth in the other. The young man turned his car onto the dirt road and drove 100 yards. Up ahead of him, he could make out a clearing cut out of the dense woods. As he got closer to the spot, he could see the reflection of the moon shining on the roof of a black van parked there. He brought his car to a stop behind the van. Getting out of his car, he walked over to the parked van. He unlocked the rear door and opened one side. Returning to the car, he transferred the limp body of the girl to the van, laying her on the thickly carpeted floor. After closing and locking the van door, then locking the door to his car, he got in the van and sat there, staring into the darkness that surrounded him. The spot that he had chosen to park his van and now park his car was in one of the most inaccessible areas of the park. A car or van parked there could not be seen from the road. The trees, with their large branches, offered perfect protection from any observers from the sky. He wiped the perspiration from his face and turned to look at the still body lying on the carpeted floor of the van. Yes, my dear, he hissed in a voice that was not rational. You will do perfectly. He started the engine and slowly drove through the darkened woods. Ahead of him, he could see the lights of Plymouth Avenue. As he neared the main street, he turned on his headlights. He came to a stop at the intersection. Probably shouldn't keep your lights on when you're fucking carting a body. Checking both ways for traffic, he made a left on the Plymouth Road and maintained the speed limit. A few miles down the road, he saw a sign that read, Plymouth, Michigan, 1 mile. An insane smile crossed his face as he slowed his vehicle down and entered Main Street. Woo! All right, well, at least we got out of the fucking tawdry sex part, and got to the murder. Well, potential murder. Chapter 2. Edward Hines Drive, or the Lower Rouge Parkway, as some people called it, was at one time considered a watershed. Webster defines a watershed as a ridge dividing the areas drained by different river systems. The Rouge River, which ran parallel for the entire length of what is now called Hines Park, drained into this watershed, making the land useless to the property owners. When the Wayne County Department of Parks and Recreation hit upon the idea of making this area a huge conglomeration of picnic and recreation sites, they had no problem in purchasing the land from the owners. The park starts at 7 Mile Road in the small town of Northville. It winds its way southeast through the city of Plymouth, through Livonia, parts of Westland, and finally ends in the city of Dearborn Heights. From the point where the park begins in Northville to where it ends in Dearborn Heights is a distance of 17 miles. The valley, which lay between the ridges of this natural watershed, was left as nature had intended it. The many trees that lined the entire length of the Rouge River and dotted the top of the ridge were left standing, creating the shady areas for the picnickers. Only those trees that interfered with the roads that were built into the recreation area were cut down. One of the problems with the park, and there were many, was the flooding. And after every heavy rain, and in the spring of the year, the Rouge River overflowed its banks. When this occurred, the park was blocked off to traffic. Still happens. Since its inception in the early 30s, the park was used by the many families that lived adjacent to it as a picnic site. Family reunions were held there. Old-timers would make it a daily habit on a sunny summer's day to go there and pitch horseshoes. Young couples found the many secluded areas in the park ideal for their romancing. Now there's a bunch of creepers that are out there. As the years passed, the park was taken over by the young. Families stopped taking their children to the park to keep them from seeing firsthand what the new liberated and promiscuous society considered fun. Starting in the late 60s, it was not unusual on a warm summer evening to see 10,000 teenagers and young people in their early 20s enjoying the facilities that the park had to offer. What had started out to be a place for families to go for an outing had now turned out to be a 17-mile orgy. I don't know if it was ever that bad. If one drove down Hines Drive on any given summer's evening, I like how Summers is capitalized, it would not be unusual to see teenagers frolicking in the nude. Open sex could be seen on the lawns, on picnic tables, on any place the couple found convenient. Drugs were used openly. The self-rolled joint could be seen. Wait, the self-rolled joint? That it rolled itself? The self-rolled joint could be seen being passed from hand to hand around the picnic sites. The Pabst Brewing Company must have set up a local distributor just for the people in the park, for that was the most popular beer consumed. The Sheriff's Department, under the direction of Sheriff William Lambert, I believe that's a fake name, had jurisdiction over the park. Out of a force of 500 deputies, approximately 100 were assigned to park duty. To try to put a stop to the flagrant drug abuse in the park, Sheriff Lambert assigned men to act as narcs to try and infiltrate the drug scene. The men, at first dressed in street clothes, sitting at a picnic table having a beer, they felt that they blended in with the rest of the scene. It did not take the regulars long, however, to discover that these seemingly innocent men who tried to enjoy a beer or smoke a joint were in reality nothing but some narc from the sheriff's department. In many cases, when they tried to mingle with the regulars, they were laughed at. The embarrassed deputies went back to the sheriff and sheepishly explained that their cover had been blown. After Sheriff Lambert questioned the deputies further, he was convinced that his men were not dressed in the proper park attire. He assigned a new group of men to the park. They dressed in t-shirts, cut-off shorts, and sneakers. They were instructed to stay in groups of 3 and 4 and play the game of cruising. That seemed to be the way the teens and the young crowd got together to have their pop parties and orgies. He also assigned 2 men to pose as joggers. It was learned from the deputies that had blown their cover that a man jogging in the park was not suspect. The park crowd considered a jogger as one of those health nuts, and they were not considered a threat to their activities. The new group of deputies reported back to Sheriff Lambert that there were 7 different picnic sites that were popular with the in crowd. Traveling west to east on Hines Drive, they were Newburgh Point, Levan Knoll, Nankin Mills Nature Center, Merriman Hollow, Maple Grove, and Perrin Field. The last area was called Knoller Bend. This area, however, was left to the older crowd, who brought their children there for an occasional outing. Each of these recreational areas had a restroom that was usually a brick building approximately 40 foot wide and 20 foot deep. The roofs were made of slate. The buildings were all well maintained. Even these restrooms were used by the park crowd for their sexual activities. The deputies soon found out that the restroom at Perrin Field was one of the most popular if you wanted to get it on with someone of the opposite sex. This restroom was located on a ridge that overlooked Edward Hines Drive. From a picnic table situated in front of the building, one of the deputies noted that the doors were never closed. There was a door on the right side of the building marked ladies and one on the left side marked men. From his vantage point, the deputy could see the stalls inside each restroom. The procedure was for a guy or girl to go into the appropriate restroom and sit down in one of the stalls and drop their shorts, or in the case of the girls, their bikini bottoms. Anyone of the opposite sex who wanted to get it on, would then go into the stall and have their sex. About a block east of the Nankin Mills Nature Center, on a ridge overlooking the park, was an old cemetery. The cemetery dated back to the 1850s and was used by the residents of Plymouth and Northville to bury their dead. One hot summer night, just before the park closed, one of the deputies who had infiltrated the park crowd was asked if he wanted to party down in a different place. "This will freak you out," the blonde that asked him had said. He joined the blonde girl and three other couples, and they made their way to the top of the steep ridge. When they reached the top of the ridge, he could make out a footpath that was barely discernible amongst the tall weeds. They followed this path about a block when he was able to make out some headstones. An old brick building with a black wrought iron fence around it was located in the center of all the headstones. The building was covered in ivy. A steel door, rusted from age, was partly ajar. The building was an old mausoleum that had long ago given up its occupant. Two of the couples, fortified with 2 6-packs of Pabst they had lugged along, entered the mausoleum. The other couple walked along the headstones, selected one, and laid down on the grass. The deputy, shocked by what he was seeing, followed the blonde girl as she made her way to the far end of the cemetery. When she found the spot that suited her, she lay down on top of the grave and beckoned the deputy to join her. By the time he reached her, she had already taken off the bikini and lay nude on the wet grass. They made love on top of the grave to the sounds of pleasure coming from the mausoleum. Wait, so the deputy just said, "Fuck it, I'm going in." Weren't these teenage girls, too? I don't know. I don't remember. Anyway, the next day, when the deputy reported to the sheriff, who thought that he had heard it all, was aghast at what he was hearing. Yeah, I'm sure he was aghast. After composing himself, he decided that he now had enough evidence to arrest the ringleaders and the dope pushers in the park. He needed to show the homeowners who had property surrounding the park that his men were indeed trying to make an effort to stamp out the illegal dope traffic, the open sex, and the nudity that was prevalent in the park today. In the next 3 days, the deputies that had been assigned to the park made 20 busts. They arrested 2 pushers and the headman who was supplying the dope to the park. Why'd this guy have to go have sex with a girl to arrest a bunch of drug dealers? To make it look good in the press, the deputies arrested 24 girls and guys for indecent exposure. There you go. On the day of the raid, 20 scout cars were dispatched to the park, along with a bus which was borrowed from the Detroit House of Correction, or DeHoco, as it was popularly called. As the suspects were herded into the bus, the blonde girl who had sex with the deputy tore herself away from the 2 cops who were pushing her into the bus. She ran over to the young deputy who was standing nearby watching the proceedings. "You fucking pig," she hissed, face livid with rage. "Well, you're going to get yours. I'll be out of that joint in a couple of hours, but you know what's going to happen to you?" "No, what, honey?" The young deputy smiled down at the young Spitfire. "Your cock's gonna fall off because, baby, I got the clap." Ah, shit. The young girl then turned and walked into the bus, leaving the startled deputy standing with his mouth open. Sheriff Lambert knew from past experience that the crackdown and the subsequent arrests would not be a deterrent to the activities of the park. Certainly, he looked good in the eyes of the homeowners in the area. After all, he had conducted a 6-month-long investigation into the illegal activities. His deputies had sought and discovered the various locations in the park where these activities were taking place. He made sure that the media played this up big in the papers and on the tube. He also knew from experience that for a while the park would be quiet. The teens and the young people would lay low. Then the whole cycle would start again. They would find new areas to have their orgies. As the weeks went by, they would get more and more brazen. In a very short time, everything would be as it was before, and he would once again have to spend the taxpayers' money to try and stop the process. When he was first assigned the responsibility of maintaining law and order in the park, he had balked. He tried to tell the city council that no way could he afford to assign enough men to the park to properly enforce the rules. He had told them it would take an army of men working 24 hours a day to keep law and order. After all, he had tried to explain to them the park was 17 miles long, with hundreds of secluded areas that could not be seen by a deputy patrolling the park. When one area of the park was cleared out of the young people, when one area of the park was cleared out of the young people who were doing their thing, another would spring up at some other location. He knew what kind of an answer he would get from the council, his superiors, and the mayor himself. Do the best you can. The mayor? Fucking wait, the county sheriff doesn't answer to the mayor, does he? And the mayor himself. Do the best you can. After all, he was told it was the taxpayers' park, and they were entitled to its use. In the 10 years that he had been sheriff, he had to admit that there had never been a serious incident in the park, if you overlook the sex, the dope, and the nudity. He had never had a rape occur in the park. I don't believe that's true at all. After all, he was told one time all you had to do was ask, and some girl would be only too happy to oblige you. There had been the usual number of arrests made for disorderly conduct, drunkenness, and the usual number of fights that one would expect of a municipal park the size of Hines. In all the years, however, there had been no deaths reported in the park. All of this was to change. In the past 3 months, there were 3 mysterious disappearances in the park. When the deputies investigated the incidents, they found that the MO was the same in each case. A girl would leave the rest of her friends, lay down in a secluded area, or she would walk away from the rest of her friends, never to be seen again. Nothing unusual had been observed by the people in the park at the time of these incidents. The area along the Rouge River was searched, but no bodies could be found. It was as if the girls had vanished into thin air. Sheriff Lambert issued a warning to anyone using the park facilities. He asked that people stay together. The area along the river was placed off limits to everyone. The park closing rule was strictly enforced. In the past, the deputies would overlook anyone who was in the park after the 10 p.m. closing time. Now, however, anyone caught in the park would be asked to leave. Because the park ran through the cities of Northville and Plymouth, Livonia and Westland and Dearborn Heights, Sheriff Lambert enlisted the aid of the police in these communities. The sheriff had decided that if a clue to the missing girls did not show up in the next few days, he would have no alternative but to close the park. Me, who used to be a cop, I understand this happened all the time in Dallas Park. Yeah, that was not fun. Chapter 3. Sarah reached out a hand. You probably don't know who Sarah is, and pushed the button on top of the alarm clock. She sat up in bed and rubbed the sleep out of her eyes. She looked down at her husband, Carl. It was the same routine that she followed day in and day out. Carl never heard the alarm or pretended not to hear it. She threw back the covers, reached for her housecoat, put her feet into her slippers, and walked downstairs to the kitchen. She put on a pot of coffee, then went to the refrigerator. After looking at its contents, she took out some bacon and eggs. She had just taken the crisp strips of bacon out of the frying pan and was putting them on some paper towel when she noticed the light come on in a small wooden panel located on the wall over the drain board. Next to the panel, attached to the wall, was an old-fashioned telephone receiver and a mouthpiece that protruded from the wall. It was an old intercom system that was installed when the telephone was still in its infancy. There were numbers on each of the buttons on the panel. Each number designated a room in the large mansion. The number on the button that was lit was 2, Pete's room. Sarah took the receiver from the hook and spoke into the mouthpiece. "Good morning, Master Pete." "Sarah, my dear," a sleepy voice answered. "I'm going to Walter's for breakfast a little later on this morning. There is something that I have to do first. Would you be a dear and fix me some toast and coffee? I'll be down in a while." "I'll have it ready for you, Master Pete," she said as she hung up the old receiver. Sarah was somewhat surprised at Pete's request. Every morning he would come down to the kitchen, grab a cup of coffee, take a few swallows, say goodbye to Sarah, and walk out of the house. His destination was Walter's restaurant, which was located only 2 blocks from the funeral home. Sarah had scolded him many times. "Why spend your money for breakfast," she would tell him, "when he could have a nice, hearty breakfast right here in his own kitchen?" Pete told her that it was not her cooking that took him out of the house each morning. It was just that he felt he needed to get out of the house for a brief period each day. After all, he told her, most people leave the homes to go to work, but he was stuck in his home all day long. He would meet Sam Guthrie, the chief of police of Plymouth, have a leisurely breakfast, discuss the events of the day, and then walk back to the funeral home and go about his business. That sure smells good, dear, Carl said as he pushed open the Dutch doors to the kitchen. Sarah slid the eggs out of the skillet onto a plate. Unto a plate, it says. She took the crisp bacon from the paper towel where they were soaking up the grease and put them on the plate. She buttered the toast, placed it with the rest of the meal, and set it in front of her husband, who had taken a seat at the large kitchen table. I heard it again last night, she said after she had poured them each a cup of coffee. Carl looked at his wife and frowned. Instead of answering her, he took a piece of toast, soaked it in an egg yolk, and took a large bite. He washed this down with a swallow of coffee and reached for a piece of bacon. Carl, are you going to deny that there is something going on in this house? Carl wiped his face with a napkin, took another sip of coffee, and looked up at Sarah, who was standing at his side. Sarah, how many times do I have to tell you? There is nothing going on in this house. What you hear is Master Peter or myself going about our business. Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee, walked back to the table, and whispered to her husband, then why do you suppose Master Pete's not going out for his usual breakfast this morning? He just now called me and told me to fix him a cup of coffee and toast. I'll be down in a while, he says. I've got something to do first, he says. Carl looked up at his wife, interrupting his next forkful of food. He placed the fork back on his plate and took his wife's hand. Sarah, you mustn't worry about yourself so. Master Pete got another body in last night. That's why he is busy this morning. Was it another girl? Why, yes, it was. Carl was startled at her question. How did you know? Sarah sat down at the table, looked at her cup of coffee, running her finger around the edge. I don't know how I knew. I just have this peculiar feeling. I just can't explain it. Carl finished the rest of his meal, wiped his face with the napkin, and got up from the table. I have to go to the warehouse. Master Pete needs some more supplies. Don't be gone long, Sarah said, as she put her arms around his shoulders. I'm afraid here by myself. Carl looked at his wife. Her face was drawn. She was actually trembling. He had never seen her like this. She had never been afraid to be by herself in the funeral home. A feeling of compassion came over him. He started to say something, then stopped. No, he couldn't. He wanted to, but he couldn't. After Carl left, Sarah busied herself with the dishes. She sensed that Carl was going to tell her something, then, for some unknown reason, declined to do so. She had noticed the change in her husband ever since Ginny's death. They had never kept anything from each other in all the years that they were married. Now he was withholding something from her. As she was drying the dishes and putting them away in the cupboard, a cold chill came over her. She sensed that someone was watching her. She turned around quickly, then froze in her tracks. Standing in the kitchen, just inside the Dutch doors, was a grinning Pete Worthington. He was dressed in his black suit, with a white shirt and black tie. Sarah stared at the young man. She had known this boy all of his life, and yet, in the past few months, he was a complete stranger to her. There was something about him that frightened her, that insidious grin, the change in his voice, and the way he would turn up around the house as if he appeared from nowhere. Morning, Sarah, he said as he took a seat at the kitchen table. I'll have my coffee and toast now, if you don't mind. Why, Master Pete, she stammered. You startled me. I didn't hear you come in. Sarah turned and went to the bread box and took out a loaf of bread. She put 2 pieces in the toaster, then took a cup from the cupboard, filled it with coffee, and set it down in front of Pete. Will Chief Guthrie still be waiting for you? Master Pete? Yes, Sarah, he'll be there. I called the restaurant and let them know that I would be late. Sarah buttered the toast, took a jar of raspberry jam from the refrigerator, put a generous portion on the toast, and put the plate in front of Pete. Thank you, Sarah. You never forget, do you? He asked as he took a bit of the toast. I mean, how the fuck could she forget if she's lived in your house since you were a baby? Why, what do you want? What do you mean, Master Pete? She smiled as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. You know very well what I mean. Buttering my toast and putting on jam. Don't you know, sir, I'm a man now. I'm 24 years old. Not that sniveling brat that you had to wait on hand and foot. Oh, Master Pete, I guess I'll always think of you as that dear little boy with the runny nose who would say, Sarah, Sarah, stop it. Then you would reach in my apron pocket, get out the Kleenex tissue, and you'd blow and blow. When you were finished, you'd tug on my skirt. I'd stoop down, and you'd give me a kiss on the cheek, and then run out of the room. Pete looked down at his cup. His facial features softened. The blue eyes lost their hardness. He looked up at Sarah and, with a voice filled with emotion, said, Sarah, I wish things could be the way they were back then. Everything was so simple, so easy. And now, he looked at his cup again. Now everything is so confused. Sarah, there are times when I don't know what I'm doing. He got up from the table and walked over to where Sarah was standing and put his arm around her. Oh, Sarah, Sarah, he cried. What can I do? I've lost her. I've lost her. Sarah patted him on the back and tried to console the distraught boy. Now, Petey, I know she's gone and we all miss her so, but you still have Carl and me. We'll never leave you, I promise. Pete stopped sobbing, gave Sarah a peck on the cheek, and turned to leave the kitchen. When he reached the Dutch doors, he turned to face Sarah. His face was once again a smiling mask, the eyes once again glazed. Sarah, dear, he said, in that strange condescending voice, I meant to tell you, I have locked Ginny's room. I've left things just the way they were that last day. I don't want anyone in there. Do you understand, Sarah? Yes, Master Pete. She changed back to her formal way of addressing him. I think I understand. I think I do too. I'm guessing that's where the bodies are. Pete opened the door to Walter's restaurant, walked to the counter, and looked at the people in the crowded room. He saw a short, stocky man dressed in a tan uniform sitting alone at a back table. Sam, how are you doing? Pete greeted his old friend when he reached the table. Well, better late than never, Sam said as he put his coffee cup down. Don't tell me you're so backed up with work that you can't have breakfast with an old friend. Now, Sam, don't give me a hard time. It just so happened that I had a client last night and I had some last minute touch up work to do. One thing about your clients, Pete, they never give you a hard time and they're always there when you go back to them. I wish I could be so lucky. Pete looked at his friend and noticed that Sam had a worried look. His face looked drawn and tired, as if from lack of sleep. Sounds like you've got problems, Sam. What happened? Did one of your men go on sick leave and stick you with a double shift? Pete laughed. Nothing so simple, Pete, Sam said. These Hines Park disappearances have got me bugged. I don't have one goddamn clue, and to make matters worse, it happened again last night. Pete looked at his friend, noticed the seriousness of his voice, and said in a surprised voice, What disappearances, Sam? What are you talking about? Pete, I don't believe you. Do you mean you to tell me that you're so wrapped up in the embalming room of yours that you don't take time to read the Observer? 3 girls have mysteriously disappeared from Hines Park in the last 3 months. Last night it happened again. Another girl vanished into thin air. No clues, no one saw nothing. No one heard nothing. They just vanished. I don't think the guy mentioned disappearances, did he? Oh, yeah, I guess he did. Still here, just listening and crocheting. Exciting times. Pete picked up a menu and glanced at the items that he knew from memory. Yes, he had noticed the stories in the Observer. Each time he read the account of the girls' disappearances, he got a strange feeling. How could anyone do such a thing? What do you have, Pete? An attractive black-haired girl dressed in a brown uniform was standing at the table, order pad in hand. Hi, Nancy. I'll have the usual, and I think Sam could use some more coffee. Yeah, Nancy, and bring me a Danish, will you? I'm still hungry. Nancy took the order, then leaned down and said to Sam, It happened again last night, didn't it? Sam let out a big sigh and answered the attractive girl, Yeah, Nancy, we lost another one. It's terrible, just terrible. Do you have any idea who's doing such a thing? We don't have any idea, Nancy. Whoever is pulling this off is smart. He knows what he's doing, and it doesn't take him long to get the girls. It's like 1 minute someone sees the girl, then they turn their back, and poof, they're gone. Where did it happen this time? Nancy asked. Across from the Nankin Mills Nature Center near the Rouge River. I talked to a kid who was getting it on with this chick. He left her lying near some bushes to get a beer. When he returned, she was gone. Pete heard the incidents that led up to the abduction. When he heard that the girl was having sex in the park before she disappeared, he got a sick feeling in his stomach. Sex disgusted him. Well, if you ask me, Pete blurted out, she was asking for trouble. What do you mean, Pete? Nancy was shocked by the tone of his voice. The girl goes to the park to have a good time and some creep does off with her? What do you mean? She asked for it. Oh no. Pete could see that Nancy was angered by what he had said. However, he knew in his own mind that he was right. The girl was without question a whore, a slut. Imagine having sex in the open in the park, yet she was bad, bad, and she deserved what she got. She was no good, Nancy, a tramp. When you act like a tramp, you have to pay the consequences. Nancy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Pete talked Pete talked like he was living in the 19th century. Sure, the girl was probably partying down with some guy that she had picked up in the park. It still didn't follow that some guy should snatch her and do whatever he had done to her. She thought a lot of Pete. They had gone out on a few dates, and even though he acted like he had never been out with a girl before, she still liked him. He wasn't like the other guys she had been out with. Although she was willing, he never even tried to kiss her. He was a perfect gentleman, very polite and very proper. She attributed this to the fact that he came from a very respected family in town. After their third date, when he was taking her home from a movie they had seen, she decided that she would be the aggressor and try to arouse him. She was a normal, healthy girl, and to be next to this good looking guy who had a beautiful body really turned her on. She had sex with other guys she had been out with, and she enjoyed it. Now that she had this good looking guy whom any girlfriend of hers would envy, she wanted to get it on with him. She had dressed very carefully that night. Instead of a blouse and a pair of jeans, which was her usual attire, she had gone to the designer's boutique in the Penniman Avenue shops and picked out a white chiffon dress. That night, after her shower, she stood before the mirror and looked at her body. She was a girl of about 5'6", black hair with blue eyes. She had a gorgeous figure for a girl of 19, large, firm breasts with generous nipples. Are there teeth? Are there greedy nipples too? Slim waist and nicely rounded hips. Her legs were a joy to behold. She reached for her favorite perfume, Fascination, and generously applied the sweet smelling liquid to her neck, underarms, breast, and as an afterthought, she applied some to the area around her pubic hair. She took the new dress and slipped it over her nude body. The garment accented every curve. The nipples on her breasts could be seen protruding from the flimsy material. As she turned to view her backside, she could see the crack in her buttocks. That ought to get it up for him, she said aloud to herself in the mirror. As his car came to a stop in front of her house, she moved her body so that she was touching his knees. She had hoped that when he saw her in the almost transparent dress, he would get the idea. He said nothing, however, only that the dress was lovely. Well, Nancy, I guess that you want to get up to bed, he had said. Pete, she had said as she put her left arm around his shoulders, do you think that I'm pretty? Why, yes, he stammered. I think you're very pretty. Do you think that I have a nice body? She had said as she unbuttoned the top three buttons of her on her dress, exposing the valley between her generous breasts. He started to turn beet red. I guess so. Yeah, I guess you have a nice body. She had moved her body so that she was almost sitting in his lap. Kiss me, Pete, she said hoarsely, offering him her lips. He started sweating profusely. He moved his head, and his lips touched hers. As he tried to back away from her, she pulled him to her, crushing her lips to his. Her tongue forced his lips open and found his. Her right hand reached out and found his thigh. Moving her hand along the thigh, it came to rest on the bulge in his crotch. Her perfume, mixed with her natural body odor, made him delirious. He was experiencing feelings that he had never felt before. What's more, he was enjoying them. He felt an ache in his groin where Nancy had placed her hand. His manhood his manhood asked to be released from its prison. Holy shit! Without knowing it, he put his hand on her breast, gently massaging the large mammary. Oh my god. Nancy had started moaning with ecstasy. She took his hand from her breast and placed it between her legs, allowing him to feel her wetness. Then she remembered, just as she was about to have her first climax, he suddenly pushed her away. I can't, we shouldn't, it's not right. I think you better go in now, Nancy. She remembered that she was dumbstruck, unable to believe what was happening to her. He had taken her to the very edge of the abyss and left her hanging there, unfulfilled. She remembered saying something to him before storming out of the car. She ran upstairs to her room and had flung herself on her bed, sobbing convulsively. When he came in the next morning for his breakfast, she hardly spoke to him. After taking the order, Nancy turned and walked to the kitchen. She gave the order to the cook, then walked to the ladies' room to try and quell the anger that was building up in her. After a few minutes, she had composed herself enough to return to the kitchen and get Pete's order. She placed the scrambled eggs, hash browns, and toast in front of Pete and gave Sam his Danish. She said nothing to either Pete or Sam. As she left the table, she caught Pete's eye, and he noticed that she had a very perplexed look on her face. Well, Pete, I've got a ton of work to do at the office. I'll see you tomorrow. Pete finished his breakfast, left the dollar tip on the table, paid his bill, and walked out of the restaurant without seeing Nancy. He slowly walked the 2 short blocks to the funeral home and went in the side entrance. He went straight to the basement, walked through the thickly carpeted lounge to a door marked Employees Only. He opened the door and entered the embalming room. The room had the appearance of an operating room that could be seen in any large hospital. The walls and floors were covered with white ceramic tile. To the left of the room, as you walked in, stood a large cabinet where Pete kept his instruments. And his instrument. On the right wall, in the center of the room, stood a large machine. The machine was made of stainless steel. On a panel in front of the machine were numerous dials recording temperature, quantity, and flow rate. Tubes protruded from the top of the machine. One tube was attached to a stainless steel sink. Another was placed in a hook at the side of the apparatus. Under the large bowl-like container was a large compressor. Next to the machine was a door marked No Admittance. Another door at the end of the room was open, exposing shelves where Pete kept his chemicals. The room was lit only by a night light that Pete kept on at all times. The dim light, reflected by the white tile, cast eerie shadows in the large room. A large light fixture hung from the ceiling in the center of the room. Under the light was a stainless steel table. On the table, completely nude, was the body of a young girl. Pete flipped the light switch, illuminating the flesh of the body on the embalming table. She was an attractive girl, about 17. She had bluish black hair. The corpse had large breasts and a slim figure. Please don't do it, Pete. Pete walked over to the body and looked down at the dead girl. A fiendish grin came over him as he reached down and brushed the black hair to one side of her face. As his hands touched her skin, he noticed that she was not soft, as a body's natural skin should feel, but hard, almost like a granite. He walked over to a closet next to the instrument cabinet. Opening the doors, he removed a white coat, gloves, and a surgeon's mask. He donned these garments, then walked over to the instrument cabinet and removed what looked like a small shut-off cock. Returning to the girl, he moved her head to one side, exposing a tiny slit in her neck. With his fingers, he moved aside the flesh until he could see the artery. He had severed the artery last night and removed the body fluid. He had injected what he felt was the proper amount of embalming fluid. Upon further examination this morning, however, he felt that he had injected too much fluid, causing the body to appear unnatural. No problem, he thought. I can remove a gallon and achieve the desired effect. He clamped the small valve to each exposed artery. Walking to the embalming machine, he set to control the suction and turned on the switch. The compressor immediately sprang to life, making a sucking sound. He walked back to the corpse and turned on the valve that he had inserted into the artery. He watched as the plastic tube that was connected to the valve in the girl's neck filled with the yellow fluid. The fluid drained out of her body to the stainless steel sink and down the drain. After about 3 minutes, he turned the machine off. He walked back to the body and ran his fingers along her face. His fingers traced an outline on her breasts, then down her belly to the large patch of black pubic hair. He continued his probing down her thighs until his fingers reached her ankles. That's fine, he said. Just fine, I think. You'll do just fine. Yeah, Rain Man. How long is this fucking chapter? About 4 more pages. Sam Guthrie had walked. I need a drink. Give me some water. Sam Guthrie had walked the short distance back to the police station. As was his custom, he crossed the railroad tracks, walked a short block, and stood across the street from a large, imposing brick building. The Plymouth City Hall housed not only the city offices of the mayor and the city council, but was also headquarters for the fire department, the police department, and the 19th District Court. The basement of the large building served as the courtroom, and to one side of the basement were 6 jail cells. Sam crossed the busy main street and entered the right side door of the building. He walked down a short hall, turned right, and stopped in front of a door marked Chief of Police. He entered his office, walked to a chair behind a large desk that was cluttered with papers. In front of him on the desk was a large manila folder. It was the report of the latest missing girl. He started thumbing through the papers in the file when the phone rang. Chief Guthrie speaking. Chief, this is Hal Willis, down in the lab. Yeah, Hal, what do you have for me? I ran that sample you gave me through some test, and guess what I came up with? Never mind the guessing games, Hal. What do you have? That white gooey substance was some of the most high-powered semen that I've ever seen. What do you mean, high-powered? Well, the spermatozoa count on the average male semen is around 7 million. This guy's love juice was over 10 million. He must have been saving it up for a long time to be that potent. Hal, are you trying to tell me that if a guy hasn't had sex for a while, that his sperm, or whatever you call it, goes up? Well, Chief, Hal laughed. It's a standing joke around here. Whenever we check out some semen and have a high count, the guys always say, this guy's been missing out. Hal, Sam paused, reflecting on something. Is it possible that a guy could have a high count if he hasn't had sex? I mean, never had sex. Well, Chief, Hal sounded more serious now. Normally, a male's sperm count stays relatively the same until the later years of his life. It is possible for a male who is still a virgin to have an extremely high count. Thanks a lot, Joe. I think we have our first clue. Sam leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head. What a piece of luck, he thought as he looked up at the ceiling. Nah, it wasn't luck. Let's give credit where credit is due. Sam, he said to himself, that was a damn good piece of detective work. Last night about 10 o'clock, he received a call from the night dispatcher at the station. The dispatcher had received a call from a boy who reported a missing girl in Hines Park. The dispatcher immediately switched the call to Sam's home. When Sam heard the young man's story, he asked the boy if he could meet him at the last place where the girl was seen. The young man agreed, and Sam had told him he would be there at 7:30 this morning. When Sam arrived at the spot, the boy was already there. He showed Sam the row of bushes and explained to him that the last time he had seen the girl was when she was laying asleep only a few feet in front of the bushes. Sam looked in the grass in the area where the boy said the girl had been lying, but found nothing. He walked around the thick row of hedges and noted that the dirt road ran parallel with the river. He asked the boy to go to the other side of the hedge. He told him that he wanted to see if there was some opening in the hedge, where a person concealed behind the hedge could observe what was going on. As he looked around the thick shrubbery, he noticed what appeared to be a white paste, or thick white paint on the grass behind the hedge. As he looked closer, he found the same substance on the leaves of the hedge. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a plastic bag. Removing a pencil from his pocket, he scooped up some of the thick white liquid and transferred it to the plastic bag. He sealed the plastic envelope and put it back in his pocket. He walked to the other side of the hedge where the boy was trying to peer through the thick shrubbery. "Come here, kid," Sam said, waving his arm at the boy. "Yes, sir," he said, trotting back to where Sam was standing. "What did the girl have on the last time you saw her?" The young man's face turned red and he hung his head. She was naked," he stammered. "You mean she was lying out here in the open with people walking all over the place and she was nude?" "Well, sir," the boy said sheepishly, "I guess we were all pretty well bombed. We smoked a few joints and had quite a few beers. We just didn't give a damn who saw us." "You said we," Sam asked. His voice had taken on a serious tone. "Do you mean that you were all walking around out here in the nude?" "Yes, sir. I guess you could say that." "Do you realize that there is an ordinance on the books that says it's a misdemeanor to expose yourself in a public place? Do you young people realize that I could haul all your asses down to jail and lock you up? When are you kids going to realize that you can't go around flaunting the law and not pay the consequences?" "Chief," the young man said, "I know we lost our cool this time, but give us another chance, and I promise we won't let it happen again." "Who are you trying to shit, kid?" Sam got angry. "I know goddamn well that the next time your crowd decides to party down, it'll be the same old story. Now get your ass out of this park and don't let me or my men catch you screwing around like this again, because I promise you I'll throw you and your friends in jail and lose the key." The boy turned and ran towards his car. Sam saw him get in, put the car in gear, and take off down the road. Sam continued to stare at the ceiling in his office, trying to piece together the events that had taken place in the past few hours. "The guy has got to be a psycho," Sam murmured out loud as he continued to work his mental jigsaw puzzle. He must have hidden behind the hedge, watched the nude guy and girl get it on, pulled out his cock and jacked off in the leaves. When he saw his chance, Sam continued to try to put the incident together in his mind. He must have crawled through the hedge and somehow gotten her behind the bushes. Then what did he do with her? This is still the goddamn question. I don't have the foggiest idea what the answer is. Oh, man. Yeah, he's a detective. Get with the program. Alright, that's 1 hour of reading. That's all you get. Unless someone pays me $14 million. I'm moving on to my other book. What's that, 3 chapters? 1 through 3. Chapter 4.